Imagine having a brother who becomes the most famous fighter pilot in the world, the Red Baron, Manfred von Richthofen. Everyone knows his name, everyone fears him. But what about his brother, the one flying the same skies, fighting the same enemies, competing for glory in his shadow? This is the story of Lothar von Richthofen, a pilot as skilled as his brother, as brave, as deadly, but a man whose greatest battles came not from enemy fire, but from living in the shadow of legend. Lothar shot down 40 Allied aircraft during World War I, 40 confirmed kills. He was one of the deadliest pilots of the entire war, but his name was always preceded by one phrase: the Red Baron's brother. He survived aerial duels that should have killed him. He endured injuries that would have grounded most pilots. He experienced combat that tested every ounce of his strength and skill. But what destroyed Lothar wasn't the enemy, it was survival itself. What happens when you live in your brother's shadow, when your achievements are always compared to his, when the world sees you as a copy, not an original? From his childhood in the German aristocracy to his transformation into a fearless combat pilot, from his brutal aerial victories to his capture and imprisonment, from his release and return home to his tragic final years, Lothar's journey is a story of valor overshadowed by legacy. It's about what happens when being extraordinary isn't enough, when being legendary means you're forgotten. Stay with me as we follow this forgotten ace through the skies of the Western Front and discover why his survival came at a price his legacy could never recover.
Let's go back to the beginning. Breslau, Germany, 1894. An aristocratic military family, old Prussian tradition, honor and duty above all else. Into this world, two sons were born: Manfred in 1892, Lothar in 1894. They grew up together, trained together, learned the same lessons about honor and service. But Manfred was older, and Manfred would become a legend. When World War I began in 1914, both brothers volunteered. Manfred entered the cavalry, Lothar followed. But traditional cavalry became obsolete almost immediately. The age of aerial combat was beginning. Manfred transferred to the Imperial German Air Service. He became a pilot. And he became the Red Baron. According to German military records preserved in the Bundesarchiv Militärarchiv and documented in official Luftwaffe historical records, Manfred shot down 80 Allied aircraft, the highest-scoring pilot of the entire war. His fame spread across Europe. Pilots trembled at the sight of his red aircraft. He became immortal, a legend even while alive. But what about Lothar? Eventually, Lothar also transferred to the air service. He became a pilot, just like his older brother. And he proved to be nearly as skilled. According to official German military records and combat documentation from the Bundesarchiv, Lothar scored 40 confirmed aerial victories, 40 kills, 40 confirmed Allied aircraft shot from the sky. That made him one of the top German pilots of the war, a true ace, a warrior of exceptional skill. But nobody remembers his name. They remember his brother's. It's a burden most people can never understand. Being excellent at something, being truly skilled, but being remembered only as a footnote to someone else's legend. Lothar didn't start flying until later in the war. By then, Manfred was already famous, already a god in the cockpit. So when Lothar entered the skies, the comparison was inevitable. But here's what made Lothar different from his brother. Manfred was tactical, strategic. He calculated every move. Lothar was aggressive, dangerous. He fought with ferocity and intensity. Where Manfred would position and wait, Lothar would attack and dominate. It was a different style of piloting, not inferior, just different. And it worked. His kill count rose, his reputation grew.
but the world still saw him as a secondary character in his brother's story. When Lothar finally joined the air service officially, the pressure was immense. Everyone knew who he was, the Red Baron's brother. They expected him to be exceptional, to match Manfred's achievements, to prove the Richthofen name was superior in any domain. But Lothar wasn't Manfred, and he never would be. He was his own pilot, his own warrior. According to training records and pilot documentation from the German Air Service, Lothar's first aerial victory came in September 1917, a British reconnaissance aircraft, shot down cleanly. One kill, the first of many. But it came late in the war. The German air superiority was already eroding. The British and French and Americans had more aircraft, better tactics, numerical advantage. Flying for Germany in 1917 was becoming increasingly dangerous. The days of air dominance were ending. The balance was shifting. But Lothar adapted. He learned. He became lethal. His kill count climbed. 2, 5, 10, 20, each victory a demonstration of skill and ferocity. Yet with each kill, the comparison grew sharper. Manfred has 80, Lothar has 30. Will he ever catch up? It was a burden that would follow him forever. Not just the pressure to be excellent, but the pressure to be the second-best version of someone else. According to German military records and combat documentation, Lothar fought with increasing intensity throughout 1918. As the war deteriorated and German forces crumbled, he continued to score victories. But the cost was becoming apparent. Injuries, damage, near-death experiences that scarred him. Flying in combat takes something from you, every engagement, every battle. Lothar was being drained by the weight of survival and comparison. Now let's talk about what combat actually was like for Lothar. Not the sanitized history book version, the real thing. Lothar flew the Albatros D-type fighters, superior to most Allied aircraft of the mid-war period. But as the war progressed, the Allies developed better machines. By 1918, flying a German fighter was increasingly dangerous. You were flying an aging machine against newer, better aircraft. But Lothar made it work, through skill, through aggression, through sheer force of will. According to German Air Service combat records preserved in the Bundesarchive, Lothar engaged in multiple aerial battles against numerically superior Allied forces, outnumbered but undeterred, outmatched but never outfought. There was one engagement in particular that nearly cost him his life. According to documented combat reports and contemporary accounts from fellow German pilots, Lothar engaged with a group of British fighters near the front lines. He was surrounded, outnumbered 4-1. Most pilots would have attempted to escape, to dive away and flee to safety. Lothar didn't. He attacked. He focused on one British aircraft and committed everything to bringing it down. Climbing, banking, firing. The British aircraft caught fire and fell. One enemy aircraft destroyed. But the other three were closing in. They had him surrounded. They had the altitude advantage. They had numbers. What happened next was pure flying skill. Lothar maneuvered his Albatros with precision that seemed impossible. He twisted, he dove, he climbed. He used every technique in every inch of his aircraft's performance envelope. And he escaped. Damaged but alive, wounded but victorious. According to combat documentation, Lothar was shot in the leg during this engagement, a severe wound that would have hospitalized most pilots for weeks or months. But Lothar was different, harder, tougher. He returned to combat within days, flying with a leg wound, in pain but still killing. This became a pattern for Lothar. Get wounded, get healed, return to combat, repeat. He was shot down multiple times. He endured injuries that would have ended the careers of most pilots, but he kept flying, he kept fighting, he kept accumulating victories. According to official German military records, Lothar scored his 30th victory in June 1918, then his 35th, then his 40th. 40 confirmed kills, a remarkable record for a pilot who entered the war late. But the war was ending. The German military was collapsing. By October 1918, the armistice was only weeks away. Lothar's last combat flights came as the war was dying. His final aerial victory was in late October 1918. Just weeks before the war ended, just days before his world changed forever.
But here's something that's often overlooked in Lothar's story, something crucial to understanding the weight he carried. Manfred died on April 21st, 1918, shot down, killed. His aircraft crashed behind Australian lines. According to German military records and post-war investigations documented in the Bundesarchiv and Australian War Memorial records, Manfred was shot by Canadian pilot Roy Brown during an engagement near the Somme. The Red Baron was dead. The legend was gone. And Lothar was still flying, still accumulating victories, still proving himself. But now the shadow was different. It wasn't the pressure of being compared to a living legend. It was the weight of carrying forward a dead brother's legacy. According to contemporary accounts from German officers and documented in official military records, Lothar took his brother's death very hard. They were brothers. They were competitors. They were bound together in ways only soldiers can understand. Manfred's death meant Lothar had to live with two burdens: the memory of his brother's achievements and the reality that he would never surpass them. Manfred had 80 kills. Lothar would finish with 40. The comparison was permanent, inscribed in history forever. Lothar continued to fly for the remaining months of the war. He continued to fight. He continued to survive. But something inside him was changing, hardening, breaking under the weight of everything. By November 1918, when the armistice was signed, Lothar had experienced more than most pilots ever would. 40 aerial victories, multiple wounds, the death of his brother, the collapse of his nation. He had survived the war. But survival comes at a cost. For Lothar, the cost would manifest in ways nobody expected. In November 1918, as the war was ending, Lothar was captured, taken prisoner by advancing Allied forces, imprisoned. For a man who had fought with such ferocity, such aggression, such intensity, captivity was a different kind of torture. According to records from military prisoner of war documentation and historical accounts preserved in multiple archives, Lothar struggled with imprisonment, the forced inactivity, the confinement, the loss of control. For a warrior whose identity was built on action and achievement, captivity was like death. But Lothar survived his imprisonment. He was eventually released. The war was over. Germany was defeated. The world was transformed. Lothar returned to a Germany he barely recognized. The empire was gone. The military was shattered. The old order had collapsed. What was a warrior supposed to do in a world that didn't need warriors anymore? According to post-war documentation and historical accounts preserved in German archives, Lothar struggled with civilian life. He tried various occupations. He attempted to rebuild, but nothing fit. Flying had been his identity. Combat had given him purpose. Now, both were gone. He was a man without a war, a warrior without a battlefield, and the weight of his brother's death never left him. Manfred had achieved immortality through his 80 kills. Lothar would be remembered only as his brother. It was a burden he couldn't escape, a shadow he couldn't outrun. According to historical records, Lothar struggled with depression and substance abuse in the post-war years, a warrior wounded not by bullets, but by the weight of living. In 1922, at just 28 years old, Lothar died. His death was shrouded in mystery and conflicting accounts. Some sources suggest suicide, others suggest complications from his wounds. The exact cause remains debated by historians. What isn't debated is that he was gone. The Red Baron's brother was dead, and he would be forgotten, overshadowed by his brother's legend forever. So, what is the legacy of Lothar von Richthofen? Officially, he's recorded as a German ace with 40 confirmed kills, a skilled pilot, a brave warrior, a man who survived multiple wounds and continued to fight. But unofficially, he's remembered as the Red Baron's brother, a footnote in someone else's story, a secondary character in a legend. And that might be the most tragic aspect of his entire life. Not that he died young, not that he struggled with the aftermath of war, but that his extraordinary achievements were never allowed to stand on their own merit. 40 confirmed kills. That's remarkable. That places him in the top tier of German pilots. He was exceptional. He was lethal. He was brave. But he was always measured against his brother's 80 kills. It's a comparison that was never fair, never kind, never accurate. Manfred entered combat earlier. Manfred fought during the war's period of German air superiority. Lothar entered later, when the balance had shifted, when German pilots were flying inferior aircraft against numerically superior enemies. By almost any measure, Lothar's achievements were more difficult, more impressive, more costly. But history doesn't care about context. History cares about numbers, and the numbers favored Manfred. That's the tragedy of Lothar's life. Not that he was inferior, but that he was perpetually compared to someone he could never surpass. It's a burden that destroyed him. Slowly, methodically, completely. What we can learn from Lothar's story is something important about achievement and legacy. Excellence is not enough if you're compared to exceptional. Skill is not valued if it's second to legendary. Sometimes the greatest battles are fought not against enemies, but against the shadows of our own family's achievements.
So what do we take from the story of Lothar von Richthofen, a German pilot who scored 40 confirmed kills, a warrior of extraordinary skill, a man who survived wounds that should have killed him, who endured captivity and loss, who lived his entire life in the shadow of his brother's legend? The truth is that Lothar's story is not about triumph. It's about the weight of living in someone else's shadow. It's about being excellent, but never exceptional. About being skilled, but never legendary. Lothar achieved more than most pilots in history, but he's remembered as Manfred's brother. And that tells us something crucial about how we measure success and legacy. Sometimes the greatest losses aren't the battles we lose. They're the achievements that never get recognition, the heroes nobody remembers. If Lothar's story moved you, if the weight of his shadow stayed with you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe for more forgotten warriors whose names deserve to stand alone. Comment below, do you think Lothar was overshadowed unfairly? What's your take on his legacy? Share your thoughts. Next week, we're covering the pilot who ejected from his burning aircraft and landed in the middle of an enemy artillery barrage and survived by playing dead for 8 hours. This story will shock you. Thank you for watching. Keep honoring the warriors that history forgot.